Thank you, Jason. So glad you guys are here, and I'm going to jump right in. When COVID-19 broke out in 2020, the governor of the state of California banned every church in the state from singing or chanting, and then he shut down thousands of churches while allowing other organizations to remain open, active, and loud, including Hollywood studios, strip clubs, and even massive crowds of protesters, which he not only allowed, but actually encouraged. When the Texas nonprofit organization Christians Engaged filed for 501c3 status in 2019, it took 18 months for the IRS even to respond. When it did, the IRS rejected the nonprofit's tax-exempt status, saying, and I quote, "Bible teachings are typically affiliated with the Republican Party. This disqualifies you from exemption under the IRS Section 501c3. In the summer of 2018, the University of Iowa kicked InterVarsity Christian Fellowship off of its campus after 25 years of work because InterVarsity would not allow people to lead the organization who disagreed with the organization's founding principles, even though the university allowed other organizations to remain on campus and to require people to agree with their founding principles. On August the 7th of this year, dozens of black-clad Antifa militants carrying shields and weapons descended upon an outdoor church service in Portland, Oregon. While police looked on, Antifa members bear-sprayed Christians and their children, lobbed flash bombs into the crowd, trashed the church equipment, and in one video recording of the assault, one Antifa member could be heard saying, "Where's your God now?" At my church in 2019, when the daughter of one of our members' sisters came out as a lesbian, she found herself supported by the Bible faculty at the Christian university where she was. When she announced to her mother, who said this is not in scripture, it's not biblical, her own family, including her own parents, began to turn against her and to pressure her and to suggest that she was not only going to lose her daughter, but could even cause her daughter to commit suicide. In Canada, as of July the 30th of this year, no fewer than 56 church buildings have either been vandalized or burned down. The Canadian government has been slow to respond, and the executive director of the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association, which is the oldest civil rights organization in Canada, tweeted a word of encouragement to the arsonists, saying, and I quote, "Burn it all to the ground." In August of 2019, the Federal Office of Civil Rights of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services found that the University of Vermont Medical Center had violated the civil rights of a nurse by seeking to force her to assist in an elective abortion procedure over the nurse's conscience-based objections. When one of my members started to university this year, they were told by the professor at the beginning of the semester, "I'm a gay man and I'm married to a gay man, and if any of you disagrees with that, you can leave or accept an automatic F." What's going on? Why so much hostility towards Christian principles and in some cases Christian organizations and Christians themselves? Well, there's a lot that's going on here. Now, this is what I want to talk about today, and I want to say, first of all, probably the best way to understand what has changed in the U.S. is that Bible-believing Christianity, and you can call it what you like. Some of you will use the label evangelical. I consider myself a theological evangelical, maybe not so much a political one. Those of you who might be from a Holiness or Pentecostal tradition, evangelicalism means something a little different to you. But it appears that at least Bible-believing Christianity in the U.S. now qualifies as a minority group. And the sad truth of human history is that most minority groups have been harassed, propagandized, marginalized, and sometimes outright persecuted by majority groups. For a lot of us who are Bible-believing Christians, this is new. We're not used to this. For many of us, it's happened so quickly, we've been caught off guard. But it probably is helpful as I go into this presentation today to remember that for most minority groups, there's really nothing new here. That minority groups in majority cultures oftentimes find themselves, really having to work really hard, either to stay under the radar or to achieve something like equality or parity with the majority groups. If you are 60 years old, which I am, which is probably an inhibition to some of you to listen to me. But if you're 60 years old, here's what you've been able to see. You've been able to see a friendliness towards Bible-based Christianity in the U.S. slowly dissipating. So the way I put it is, I've seen A, B, C, D, E, F, and I know what comes next, G. Like I've watched this. If you're a young person and you grew up only with a G, that's just the way life is. You actually have no reason to think there's an H coming because your world has always been a G. But for those of us who've been able to watch the developments, it's actually a fairly ominous place to be right now. That is, to be a Bible-believing Christian, because what you realize is that where in the past, Bible-believing Christianity generally was not only free to exercise itself, and I should say mostly, I'm speaking of white Bible-believing Christians, because if you're African-American, it's never really been that way for you. To suddenly a place where to take biblical stands, I'll talk about some of the issues in a moment, is to find yourself really not just out of step, but maybe in a position of being propagandized, that I said, canceled, discriminated against, deplatformed. Perhaps you find yourself unable to hold certain jobs. You're being ordered by your HR department or university or the education board. You might have your own family members who are saying to you that there's something wrong with you. So a lot of us are feeling this in our guts, even if we're not particularly well equipped to articulate it. So I'm going to treat this session as a call for us to make our decisions once and for all that we're going to stand for Jesus, regardless of what happens in the culture around us, and that we're going to do so in a way where disciple-making remains the main thing, because I'll make the case in just a moment. If disciple-making isn't the main thing, in a lot of ways we've already lost the struggle. And while we do this, we do so with the kind of joy and the kind of optimism that people who already know how the end is going to occur can have. So let's talk a little bit about what I'm calling hostility. And I'll put it in the kinds of categories that some of you, and maybe some of your friends, and certainly people in your congregations are having to face right now. So it's not uncommon. I'll tell you just a few of the stories that I've gotten from my own congregation. So we're just down the road, as Jason said, church of about 3,000. And I've had quite a few of them share. I preached a series on this not long ago, and it's sort of just brought people out of the woodworks who are sharing their stories. I have a story of a young man who was a nurse who was working for an organization. I'm going to have to keep everything anonymous, who was told that they were going to begin providing abortions, and it was not an option in his job. When he objected, because he says, to be Christian is to be pro-life, he was told, well, you're going to have to make a decision. You're either with us or you're not. And so he ended up losing his job. He's taken another job now. God's working with him. But what he said was he was really shocked to be told that you don't have much choice in this. I have a pharmacist who is told now by her, again, I want to keep everything anonymous, told by her medical center that they're going to have to provide the abortion pill, we'll use that term. She objected, and she was told, well, then you need to find another job. We have a pilot who is told that he can't wear a cross as a necklace. Now, meanwhile, all other kinds of political expressions or various cultural expressions are allowed, but not the cross. We have a valedictorian who was told that when she was preparing to speak at the graduation ceremony, you can speak on any subject except for your religion, which, by the way, is totally unconstitutional. I mean, it's unconstitutional to say that. And my guess is that the school is not expressly hostile towards the Christian faith. They're scared of being sued. That's probably what it is. And that tells you the world in which you live when people are afraid of being sued. We have a minister on staff who's has been working at a homeless shelter. He was working with a woman. She was identifying as a man, not even for very long. And as they talked about Jesus, he eventually brought her to Christ. She discovered all this, the joy of Jesus. She began to talk about herself again as a woman. And he just posted a little celebration thing on Facebook. The next day, his account was shut down. This happens to us. So we're not talking about something that happened, somewhere out on the West Coast where you might say, well, of course on the West Coast this happened. This happened at my congregation to one of our staff members. He eventually got the Facebook page back, but not the post. Some of you have been told, I've had this one happen. We've had a member who's come up and said, look, I've been told that next year, our organization is going to be a sponsor of the Gay Pride Parade and that I'm going to have to be there. I don't know what to do. By the way, that's in June. So this has happened since last June. And the clock is now ticking. He's going to have to make a decision. Do I go and show his support? Do I give up my job? Am I going to fight my boss, my HR department? What do I do? These kinds of decisions are facing us all they're all around us now. A parent came up to me. She gave me 10 questions that she and her daughters are facing in school. Here's one. She has a third grader who has a peer in the third grade who is in the process of transgendering. The teacher is celebrating it and inviting the kids to write her a celebration card. Now, the pressure in the school, this is third grade, and it's here in the Bible Belt. The pressure is, do I write a celebration card as a third grader? Or do I not do it and be the only one who's not doing it and communicate to everyone, well, what will she be told? She'll be told you hate this child. That's what she'll be told. So this is happening all around us. And I want to suggest that for a lot of us, we were just caught off guard by how quickly Bible-believing Christianity has suddenly become sort of, in some sense, a minority group. Maybe even the subject, I think it's fair to say, the subject of hostility in the U.S. They don't like the word persecution when it comes to American Christians. I'm not suggesting that we're not being persecuted. In the bigger sense, the word persecution simply means to be treated with hostility. But for many of us, we know people in the developing world, people in the global South, people in socialist countries, for whom the persecution is much more severe. So it seems to me that we should reserve that word for those special saints. But I will say hostility is new for many of us, and it's caught a lot of us off guard. So when I preach this sermon series, I've had several people who, follow what we do online, who have said, no one else is talking about this, which I think sometimes it's an effort to compliment me, which I appreciate, so I don't want to sound ungrateful. But I do want to say, well, I'm not the only one talking about it, first. And the second thing I want to say is, if your church is not talking about it, odds are it's because it's caught your church off guard, as it has us. It's caught me off guard. Many of us just didn't see it coming. That we assumed that a liberal democracy would be sort of an open space where every idea could come in and where people were able to share their different beliefs, and we really would have a pluralistic or a diverse society. And we sort of naively thought everyone was going to keep doing that, and suddenly we discovered that's not the case. So I'm arguing that it appears that since we've gone through A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, it appears that H is coming next, and we better prepare ourselves. That's what I'm arguing. I do think there are really about 4 areas where we're going to find ourselves really out of step with our culture. The first one is our idea of religious freedom. And we'll talk about religious freedom, and when we do, everything needs to be nuanced. I want to say that if we find ourselves in a hostile culture, we want to be really modest about it. We want to be modest for a couple of reasons. First of all, because we're taught to be modest in Scripture. But second, I just think it's really unfair to ourselves and to the world if we talk about religious freedom, for example, and not acknowledge the fact that Christians have some of the worst record on religious freedom in history. It would be really insincere not to mention something like that it appears that Christians discover religious freedom about the time it starts to be taken away from us. And if we're not honest about that, then, well, we've not served Jesus very well. So one can think about many, many, many Christian nations, so-called Christian nations, where religious freedom was, it was a nice principle for those who had the power. For example, if you were a Mormon in the 19th century, religious freedom for you was, it was not all it was cracked up to be. And those who were persecuting you were Bible-believing Christians. If you were, again, in a black church in the American South, in the middle part of the 20th century, early part of the 20th century, I suspect your church was under constant threat by Baptists, Presbyterians, Methodists, members of the Churches of Christ, Christian churches. So we want to be careful what we say about religious freedom. But having said that, what we do need to acknowledge is that we Christians actually do now have a fairly minority view of religious freedom in the U.S. So it is our first constitutional right. And, the First Amendment is really clear on it, that the Congress, or the state, as that's been interpreted, really has no right either to establish a religion or to restrict the free exercise thereof. So you actually have a constitutional right to practice your religion not only in your church. I do want to remind you, the Constitution doesn't speak of the freedom to worship. That's a ruse. It's a red herring. That's something designed to distract you from what the Constitution actually says. When someone says you have the freedom to worship, what they mean is as long as you're in your building, we don't care what you do, but when you come out, you'll do it our way. That's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says you have actually the freedom of religion, the freedom openly to express your religion in the marketplace, out and open. But we didn't need the Constitution to give us that. That's a God-given right. And one of the things that we should remind ourselves of is that the early church faced religious discrimination, and the religious discrimination that it faced was analogous to what's beginning to happen in the West, in the U.S., for example, which is you will compromise your positions if you want to do business with us. That was Rome. That's exactly what Rome did. Rome constantly pressured the Christians. Compromise your position or you won't do business with us. And that's where Christians are finding ourselves today. And you need to remind yourself that there are texts such as Revelation 18 and 19, and down into 20 even, where Rome is excoriated for that. That is, it's not just a First Amendment right. God actually says to Rome, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, the whore who sits on the waters. And he goes all through these things. You're going to be a haunt where demons live, where the buzzards live. There's never going to be in you the sound of a trumpet or a flute again. There'll be no more joyous weddings. Why? Because Rome dared to say to the Christians, compromise or you won't get to do business with us. If that principle was true with the Roman Empire, it's true with any other empire as well. I think a second area where we find ourselves being harassed, and by the way, these are areas where we're currently being harassed. Who knows what's coming next? It is the idea of abortion and pro-life issues. I want to be nuanced on this one because I'm not arguing in this presentation today that we disagree with secularism. That's kind of a given. My point today is not to say we and they disagree, and because we disagree, we're persecuted. That actually is a non sequitur. There are a lot of people, I disagree with my wife, but she doesn't persecute me. Disagreement's not the same thing as persecution, right? It's not the same thing as harassment. So I'm not arguing that because we disagree, we're persecuted. What I'm arguing is that in these areas, I'll use the term secularism, although I'm not comfortable with that term. I have some better terms, but they're all loaded. What I'm arguing is that secularism is trying to bully us into compromising. I'm not arguing we disagree. Obviously we disagree. I'm arguing that you're not going to be allowed to disagree. That's what I'm arguing. There's a difference there, a big difference. If you don't see the difference, I didn't do a very good job today. So I actually think that there are now all sorts of bills, social pressures, as I mentioned, institutional pressures for us to give in on a Christian pro-life position. So the Hyde Amendment is under threat now. It would not surprise me to see it repealed. For the federal government is doing everything it can right now to begin to use tax dollars in order to underwrite abortion against the will of the majority of Americans, in fact. So you'll be put in a position where you have to pay for abortions even though you'd object to it. I do think that there are organizations such as Catholic hospitals that are going to find themselves probably at risk of losing their licenses if they don't begin to perform abortions. That's already at the door. My church has some OBGYNs, we have some pediatricians and so forth. They're all actually a little quiet around me because they're afraid I'll use it as a sermon illustration if they say anything to me. But there's an anxiety there that our licenses, our practices are at risk if we don't compromise on this very important issue of whether or not we protect the lives of the unborn. And so the pressure there is for the organizations and even the individual to begin to cave. And I want to say, in a lot of ways, again, it actually makes sense that we should be harassed in this area. It makes sense. You know why it makes sense? Because when people get power, they want everybody else to agree with them. I just remind you, when we had power, we were doing the same kind of thing. We want everybody to agree with us. And so every culture is going to enact its values into law. That's what happens. It turns out there is no such thing as a neutral state. Libertarianism, if you're a libertarian, God bless you, it's not possible. It doesn't happen. That governments can't help themselves. They're going to legislate their values. So now that a secularist value set is the majority in the U.S., in my opinion, they're just going to legislate their values, and you're in the way if you hold to Christian values. I think a third area has to do, and probably the biggest area, has to do with what's called SOGI issues. That's sexual orientation, gender identity. By the way, I didn't make that term up. I used that term at church, and I had some 17, 8-year-olds who didn't like my sermon series, and they were like, he even made up that word, SOGI, ha, ha, ha. And it's like, no, this is a legal term, SOGI. Sexual orientation, gender identity. It appears to me that that's the greatest source of conflict between Christians and secularists in America, by far the greatest. It's so great, in fact, that it makes it appear that Christians are mostly interested in sex. It's kind of sad because we have to talk about sex and gender, transgenderism, same-sex activity, and so forth so much that it could easily appear that we're just obsessed with it. That's unfortunate. We aren't the ones who made it an issue. What we're doing is trying to defend a biblical position. Whenever a biblical position is under attack, you end up having to talk about it a whole lot more. By talking about it a whole lot more, it makes it appear as though that's a central issue. I do think sex and gender, from an anthropological standpoint, I think it's a very important issue. It probably is a central issue to being a human. So it's a super, super important issue. But for the Christian faith, it's not as big as the cross. It's not as big as the Sermon on the Mount, which, although it does include sexual issues. And so we're in this awkward place of you have to talk about it a lot because all your people are under assault. But by talking about it a lot, you make it sound as though it's the biggest thing. And so again, we're experiencing what harassed minorities have experienced a lot. So I'll give you just an illustration. Our church is multi-ethnic, so we have different ethnicities. And we have a small group that I help, African-American members and I kind of run. We keep running members through this where we talk about race, especially whites and blacks. And most of the whites who will go through this, they'll say what? They'll say, everything seems to be about race for our black members. That's a common white experience. Everything seems to be about race. We just don't think about it that much. And what we have to explain is, if you're constantly being harassed because of your race, then everything does become about race for you. And so what a lot of our black members will say is, our life's bigger than our race, but we have to keep talking about race because it appears you're not hearing us. In the same way, the Christian faith is about a whole lot more than sex and gender. But because that's where we're being harassed, we have to talk about it a lot. And so it would be really helpful for us to remind ourselves that though we must speak about it often, it's not the defining issue of the Christian faith. Does that make sense? Now, it is under these SOGI issues, I think, that we find ourselves in real trouble in the U.S. I'll just tick off a few things that I think will help us think it through. So our children and all of us really are being, Harrington would say, we're being discipled by a culture that stands against biblical teaching. We're being discipled by, I would use the phrase, almost propagandized. I think we're being propagandized. So again, if you have a third grader and they're being told to write a celebration note to someone who's transgendering, is that like 10 years old? 10 years old? That's a form of propaganda. If you're being told that if your parents don't support it, they're haters, that's a form of propaganda. But it's actually everywhere. I think the media are constantly propagandizing us. Hollywood is constantly propagandizing us. My feeling, though you don't have to agree with me, is that the least diverse places in the US of A are our universities. They talk the most about diversity, but there's a real uniformity of what you can and cannot say and what you can and cannot believe. It's a form of propaganda. If you don't believe that, just go to any university, even a Christian one, and start challenging the dominant narrative in the U.S. about SOGI issues and see what happens. I mean, you'll be escorted off the university campus, which is, just in case you didn't notice, that's not a form of diversity. That's a form of uniformity. We find ourselves being propagandized, I think, by our own family members who are just, as one person said to me, a parent said to me, man, it's enough just to raise a child. Do we have to fight this fight too? And so we have a situation where a young man grew up in our youth ministry, came out, he married another young man, and the whole family was just like, we can't lose our son. Which I said, I don't want you to lose your son. But they're really wrestling with, we don't even know what to do. And, his siblings are struggling with this. I'm just suggesting that we're living now in a world of disinformation. Just as an illustration, in what other category could I wake up and say, I feel like something? And suddenly, not only is everyone in America expected to affirm that I am whatever I felt, but you will get fired if you don't. I mean, if I woke up today and said, I feel like a woman in the US of A, not only do you have to say I'm a woman, you'll get fired if you don't say I'm a woman. It tells you that we're in a world of disinformation. That it's a world that's really untethered now to reality. And that shouldn't surprise us because at the end of the day, there's only one reality, and that's Jesus Christ. And so being untethered from Jesus, you simply drift further and further from anything that is real. I think not only do we face disinformation and propaganda, but we also face canceling and censorship. So it's now pretty common for ministries to be deplatformed. We have a church not far from here, not far from Nashville, that they don't even really know what they did, but they got booted off YouTube and their account was canceled due to, they assume a sermon, although the pastor of the church says, I don't even know what I said in the sermon. We've been asking ourselves at our congregation, because I've preached this sort of thing, how far do we want to go and get booted off Vimeo? It really hurt us to be thrown off Vimeo. We have a YouTube channel. I don't know how much we use it. Facebook's a big deal to us. Like, how far do we want to go knowing that we could be booted off? It's a form of canceling. There are actually scientific books on SOGI issues that are not sold on Amazon because they don't toe the party line anymore. And so Christians face not just propaganda and disinformation, but we also face sort of a cancellation, a cancel culture, if you will, and a form of censorship. And again, if you don't believe that, then go to your place of work and make a biblical statement about a SOGI issue. That's all you got to do, and my point will have been proven. And you know how my point's proven? You won't do it. You already know you can't do it. And the fact that there's some things you can't say that are actually, to say that, CNN said this a while back. CNN was arguing against the governor of, I believe it was South Dakota, She had come out with a bill, or she had signed a bill, as I recall, that said that a transgendered person cannot participate in the sports of the gender to which they've transitioned. CNN came out and made this remark. This was only a few months ago. They said there is no consensus for how to assign sex at birth. Now, when you hear a statement like that from a major news organization, you're living in a world of propaganda. It's possible that CNN doesn't know that every single cell of the 26 trillion cells in a female body has a double pair of X chromosomes. It's possible CNN. They may never have even seen under a diaper, for all I know, at CNN. But everyone in here knows. But you can't say that at work, and the fact that you won't say that proves my point. You won't say that because you're afraid it'll cost you something. It could cost you a promotion. There was a study that was done just a couple of years ago that if you even add one Christian word to your resume, it's a study of, I want to say it was 8,000 job applications. I've got it written down, but it's in 8 pages of notes. And just go online and you'll see it, and then I won't have to wade through 8 pages of notes, which you would become another candle by walking out, because I think each candle is someone who walked out on a presentation of mine, kind of a memorial. Yeah, you see, they didn't like it either. One Christian word on your resume reduces your chances of getting a job in the U.S. by 40%. We have counselors who have told me, school counselors who have told me, don't put your Christian stuff on your Facebook page when you send an application into a university, because they look at your Facebook, and if they see that you did Christian work in Guatemala or wherever it is, it will reduce your chances of being admitted as a student into that university. So if you don't believe that, let me say 2 things. First of all, it's probably because you just haven't seen it. But second, try it. The fact that you would tell your own kids not to do it proves my point. We already instinctively know it. Most of us instinctively know it. We have an author at our church. I have to be really careful, because these are really explosive things when they get out. It's an author who has written a book, and they had to be really, really, really careful who they got to publish it, because they knew that if a certain publisher published the book and their place of work found out, they could lose their job. As a Christian publisher, they ended up trying to dodge a Christian publisher, even though it's a Christian book, because they didn't want their place of employment to find out that they were cooperating with a Christian publisher. I mean, this is just ordinary stuff now. And if you're in a church, you may not know this is what your people are struggling with, but this is what they're all, if you're working for a church, this is what they're all struggling with. And the fact that so many of us, I use this phrase, internalized dimitude. I don't think that's going to be a phrase from David Young that takes off and wins the world, but it's the right term. In Muslim majority countries, there are what's called dhimmis. It's just a word that means a foreigner, but in Muslim majority countries, dhimmis are treated differently than Muslims. They have to pay a special tax oftentimes. In a lot of Muslim majority countries, churches aren't allowed to be built. Church buildings aren't. You can't even, in places in Turkey, if someone breaks your window, you can't even repair the window. There are certain jobs that are off limits to you. And here's the sad thing for me. It's called Dimitude. It's a fairly recent term, but it's an accurate term. What's sad to me is that people begin to feel Dimitude inside. They begin to feel inferior. Christians begin to feel like there's something wrong with them in a Muslim majority country because they're being treated like there's something wrong with them. And oddly, they don't know that's happening to them. They just don't realize it's happening to them. And what I think is happening to some Christians in the U.S. is that we are under some sort of a dimitude. We're at least becoming more and more a dimitude class of people. And I'm not sure we realize that's what's happening to us. And that's why I say, if you don't believe what I'm saying, just go to a college campus and teach the Bible. And the fact that you won't do it, if you hadn't thought that through, and you're like, well, okay, since he put it that way, I guess there's a problem. You're internalizing the dimitude. Like you don't even see it's happening. Even you're being quiet and you don't see why you're quiet. So let me say just a couple of other things. I do think that we're facing a rising form of discrimination. So there are universities that are going to have to make very difficult choices. Y'all know that the The Bible College in Ozarks, Christian church school, was recently told by a federal judge that they cannot discriminate against transgender people in their dormitories. So think of it this way. You send your 18-year-old to a Christian university, and she, we'll say, is placed in a room with a man who just transgendered last week into a woman. And there's nothing the school can do to stop the two of them from being roommates with one another, sharing a shower together and so forth. A federal judge has said the school cannot stop that. And by the way, the Equality Act that it's working its way now through Congress explicitly seeks to reverse the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was supported by 98% of Congress in 1993, I think it was, signed into law by Bill Clinton, which says that the government cannot impose any regulations on religious people unless there is a very compelling reason to do so. The Equality Act that the current president has said he'll sign when it gets through Congress, openly and actively reverses that. It literally says you cannot discriminate on SOGI issues, including for religious reasons. So it literally says the RFRA cannot be applied to any of these issues. So all of a sudden we find ourselves now the subject of discrimination. Y'all may remember the 1990s, the state of California overwhelmingly supported a proposition, I think it was Proposition 202, but I don't remember the exact number, that banned discrimination in the state of California. A laudable thing. Should be proud of the state of California for that. Y'all may not know that last year the state of California sought to pass a referendum, couldn't get the word, I wanted to say reformation, a referendum that would undo Proposition 202 and allow for discrimination against. They got millions of votes. It narrowly failed. Now, why would the state of California suddenly want a proposition that allows for discrimination? And the answer is because now those with secular power want to bully those who disagree with them. And they want the state to permit that. And that explains why there are pastors, why there are churches, why there are religious people in the state of California who are like really under some duress. Do you know that in the state of California, it is a crime to use the wrong pronoun in a nursing home, which by the way is a quirky thing because, you know, I've spent a lot of time in nursing homes. There's probably not a whole lot of transgendered people in nursing homes. But it is a crime punishable by up to a year in prison. That's a law. There's actually a law according to, I don't want to throw people under the bus. When you do a presentation like this, you know, you risk getting people thrown off Facebook or whatever. I mean, the fact that we have to ask this question tells you that what I'm saying, at least in some sense, is right. I have a Canadian pastor, he's runs a large ministry, who told me that there are certain cities where it's a crime for him to say that same-sex activity is a sin, punishable by up to 2 years in prison. To say the words, just to say the words. So I think discrimination is back, the threat of fines, the threat of losing your accreditation, the threat of losing your license. So if you work, for example, in the field of counseling or psychology, you know already the pressure's been on you for more than 10 years. And we're not just talking about conversion therapy. I'll let somebody else sort out what to make of that. But what I will say is that imagine yourself put in a position where you have a same-sex couple comes in, they want marriage therapy from you, and you have a counseling license. What do? You know that if you say no, you'll lose your license. You can't practice counseling anymore because you said no. You know that if you say, I will help you strengthen your marriage, I hope you think there's something wrong with that as a Christian. So the entire profession is cornered now. All Christian counselors are cornered by this. And so Christian counselors are having to learn all sorts of, to quote Jesus, how to be as shrewd as a snake and as gentle as a dove. That is, how to dodge these sorts of things. I do think it's going to get worse. We've had our insurers at our church talk to us about liability issues, and I'm not talking about breaking your ankle. So, for example, we're in Tennessee, Bible Belt country. If we open our building to the public to be used for heterosexual weddings, our insurance has told us, you're going to be liable when you say no to a homosexual marriage. And we're concerned you're going to get sued. So we need you to ask yourself some hard questions if you want to renew your liability insurance with us. So just think about that even a church could find itself in a position where it is not allowed to make what we would consider to be religious and reasonable decisions on whose weddings they'll host. There are now several notorious cases. Most of you know the story of Jack Phillips, I'm assuming, in Colorado Springs, who was sued, by the way, by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission for not, we want to be careful how we say this. Jack Phillips was happy to sell a cake to a gay couple. He does it every day. He sells cakes to anyone who walks in. He's employed gay people. What he was asked to do was to create a work of art celebrating same-sex marriage. And he said, I can't do that. He also won't create a work of art celebrating Halloween. He's as a religious person, and by the way, I probably disagree with him on Halloween, but he just says, I don't do Halloween stuff. I don't do other things. There's certain works of art I won't create. Let me just pause and ask you, in what world would we say you should be punished for refusing to create a work of art? Imagine if you're a black baker and a group of white supremacists come in and say, hey, not only are we going to buy a cake, we would like for you to put a Confederate flag on it. Does the black baker have a right to say no? According to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, they do not have a right to say no. They have to make a Confederate cake. That's what they're arguing. By the way, when Jack Phillips refused to do this, when the suit was brought against him, same-sex marriage was illegal in the state of California. I mean, he wasn't even breaking a law. It was illegal to do it. The guy has been in litigation for almost 10 years. It finally got to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said about the first suit that there was open animus towards Jack Phillips. And by the way, that's why the Supreme Court sided in his case. They did not say you can't force an artist to create a work of art. What they said is you can't do it with animus. So it's still unclear how all this is going to sort out. He was sued the very next day. His whole life is just now a long series of lawsuits because every time he clears a hurdle, another group sues him because their interest is not a wedding cake. Their interest is in destroying Jack Phillips. They want to put him out of business. They want to destroy him. There are, within 5 miles of Jack Phillips's bakery, 20 other bakeries. It's not the cake they wanted. They wanted to destroy Jack Phillips. And I'm just suggesting to us that we may find ourselves, all of us, in that kind of position. So I may not have persuaded you. And I know I even said I had 4 or 5 points and I've left a few out, but I want to move on because I want to just close by saying that there are some strategies that every Christian needs to begin to consider. If you haven't considered these, let me lay them out for you. Strategy number 1, I'm assuming most of you were baptized in this room. My first strategy is live baptized. That is, when you're baptized in whatever church it was, in some form or another, you made a public declaration, Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Now stand by it. You make your decision once and for all, I stand with Jesus and I'm not going to back down. I want to tell you, by the way, one of the greatest things you'll ever give yourself is that statement. I've told this story a couple of times lately, and it doesn't play all that well, but I'm going to tell it real quickly one more time. When I was in junior high, my church had taught us it was a sin to dance. Now, since then, my daughter got married and asked me to do the daddy-daughter dance, and I sinned, but then I repented right afterwards, so I think I'm okay. My church taught it was a sin to dance. I showed up one time in the 7th or 8th grade, I don't remember when it was, and our gym class, is like 3 classes came together, so like 100 kids. The coaches said, hey, we're going to learn this week, we're going to learn to dance. It was out of the blue. I had no idea it was coming. And I just remember trembling. I broke out in a cold sweat and thinking, I can't do this. My dad will spank me if I do it. So I went to one of the coaches and said, I can't do this. And the coach said, oh, yeah, you will be able to. We'll teach you how. And I was like, no, I don't think I'm communicating that well. I can't do it. And she said, yeah, you can. We'll show you how. And I said, no, I can't. I'll get in trouble if I do it. And she said, well, for what? She had no idea what I was talking about. I said, well, because I think it's a sin. And she was so exasperated at me. She looked at the class and said, hey guys, David Young thinks it's a sin for y'all to dance. And I just melted. I was so humiliated. Then another coach in the class comes over and puts his hands on my shoulders and got his face this far from mine. He leans in and he says, can't you just give in this week? Look at how they're looking at you. He was a member of my church, that coach was. When he did that to me, but up to that point, I was afraid my dad would spank me. But when he did that to me, he lit something in me. It's like, I almost started cussing. It was, heck no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to dance today. I'm not going to dance tomorrow. I'm never going to dance. You can expel me, suspend me, do anything you want to do. I'm not going to dance, and I'm not going to back down. That's what I said to him. And by the way, I hope he wasn't at my wedding, my daughter's wedding. But here's the deal. When I said that to him, that was one of the most peaceful moments of my whole life, because I knew who I was at that moment. Right or wrong, I knew who I was. And here's the crazy thing. You know what they did? They told me to go in the corner for the next week. I had to write off, which is just write a bunch of nonsense for a week. And when I headed for the corner, 12 other people raised their hand and said, can we go with him? They just needed one person to stand up. That's a little sidebar, but I'm going to say this. When one person stands up to a bully, it gives everybody else courage. Like, be the person who stands up to the bullies. My first point is to say this. If you're baptized into Jesus, if you've already declared him Lord of your life, it's about to be tested. Don't back down. Draw a line in the sand and say, this is who I am, and I don't back down. It'll bring you more peace and more assurance than you can imagine if you haven't done that. Second, I want to remind you from Ephesians chapter 6, our battle is not really cultural and it's not really political. We need to say that because right now, as America becomes increasingly divided, it's real easy to get what I'm saying confused with the culture wars or with political wars. I think politics matter. Millions of people have died because of bad politics. Politics are really important. Super important. The culture wars, I think, are being fought for right reasons or good reasons. That is, we really are divided culturally. But at the end of the day, that's not your battle. Paul says in Ephesians 6, verse 12 and following, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's against these spiritual forces, he would have said in Ephesians chapter 2, in the heavenly realms or the spiritual realms, the unseen realms. That what we need to understand is that ultimately, this is a spiritual battle for us. And if you don't fight it spiritually, if you don't perceive this to be a battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil, guess what? You start hating people who aren't like you. So it's just real helpful to remind ourselves, we don't fight against our enemies, we fight for them. That the people who would disagree with us and harass us, they're not our enemies, they're in bondage to our enemies. That's why I said earlier, disciple making is the only way to deal with this. Because when I look at someone who's harassing me as my cultural and political enemy, what's my response? Write angry Facebook posts and tweets and scream at them and tell my kids how bad and evil they are. Is that what Jesus did? What I'm supposed to do is look at them and realize these guys are in bondage to this evil. We have a common enemy, and it's the devil, and my job is to set them free from the common enemy. That's why the Bible can say so many times, bless those who persecute you. We don't internalize anxiety. We don't internalize fear. We certainly don't hate. We love our enemies. We pray for them. We want to help them get out of this. The harder they push against us, the more we ought to be discipling them. Help them escape the bondage. It's a spiritual battle that we're fighting. Ultimately, it's spiritual. And politics will go a long way, but they don't solve the problem. The other problem with politics and the culture wars is that it gets Christians sucked into all sorts of things that at the end of the day, so here, I'll give you something to get mad at me about. Another candle. How many churches have squandered so much of their capital arguing about masks and vaccinations and so forth? Maybe there's something there I don't see, but why get sucked into that when we have a lost world that needs Jesus? Isn't that a lot more important to us? Rather than arguing over, star bellies and non-star bellies and all that sort of stuff, why don't we look at a world that is enslaved to the evil one and say, my job is to set them free from that. It's a spiritual battle at the end of the day, which is why the Bible in the New Testament almost hardly ever mentions politics. Think about when Jesus is asked, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? They presumably present him with a denarius whose picture is Tiberius. Tiberius was the emperor. It could have been an earlier emperor, but we've all presumed it was Tiberius. Tiberius was the most vile, vulgar, he was a horrible person. Far worse than either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. They're saints compared to Tiberius. And what does Jesus say? We're going to overthrow this guy. No, he just says, give him what's his. Got his picture on it, give it to him. I don't care. And give God what belongs to God, which is me. It's as though Jesus is like, let's sidestep all that and let's keep focused on our mission. Our mission is to make disciples. Let me give you a third thing. I want to encourage you to go on and make a commitment to holiness. So the secular world around us, the highest good in the secular world around us is happiness. The highest good in the scripture is holiness. And they're not the same thing. Turns out that holiness can produce happiness, but happiness doesn't produce holiness. So we're called to be a holy people over and over again. In fact, we are living as exiles and pilgrims in our land right now. But over and over again, the Bible talks about exiles and pilgrims. 1 Peter, you guys know this. 1 Peter, the first 2 chapters, really the whole letter of 1 Peter. Down in chapter 4, don't think it's strange. All the hostility you're facing today as though something odd's happening to you. And so our defining characteristic needs to be holiness. And that means we probably need to look inside of ourselves and ask, where are we compromised? The greatest danger to a minority culture is compromise. So when people come here from Korea or wherever they come, and they set up a minority community, the biggest thing the parents are afraid of is that their kids will become like you, that they'll compromise and become like the dominant culture. They want their culture. So to be holy means to make the decision, I'm not going to compromise. I'm going to try to live the kind of life, whether it has to do with ethics or whether it has to do with sexuality or morals or whatever it is, I'm going to live a holy life. And I want to say this, number 4, this deserves to be unpacked, but we don't have time. I do want to say that we can live subversively in a hostile culture because we have many examples in Scripture where minorities have to do this. I'll quote Jesus again. When he's sending out the 12 in Matthew 10, he says, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. Be as wise as a snake. And think about what a snake does. A snake will hide in the grass until it's the time. That it's okay to have strategic silence. Code switching sometimes is going to have to be part of our strategy, where when I'm around you, I can talk openly and freely, and in certain contexts, I have to be really careful what I say. Actually, that's okay. Think about the first 2 people connected to the Exodus. In the first chapter of the book of Exodus, these 2 midwives, Pharaoh says, I want you to kill all the babies. I don't know what they did. They didn't lie because God approved of what they did. My guess is that they just dragged their feet getting to all the deliveries so they wouldn't have to kill the babies. So when they show up, the baby's already delivered, probably already working the farm. That's how they were back then. And so they would say to Pharaoh, man, these women aren't like your women. Before we can get there, they've already had their babies. That's a way of dragging your feet and acting subversively. I think that there's a room for Christians to do this so long as we do not break any of the teachings of Jesus. And there may come a time, as I said, when the dodging's over and you have to say, that's it. This is who I am and I'm not going to back down. But it's not a sin to dodge in certain cases. I want to say a few other things. This is a really good time for you to draw close to your Christian community. Some of you are familiar with the works of Rod Dreher. He's written several books. His last 2 books were The Benedict Option, which came out several years ago, and then I think last year his book, Live Not by Lies, came out. Dreher actually advocates that we move into neighborhoods close to each other. And by the way, I'm probably a evangelical version of Rod Dreher. That is, he has a pessimistic view of what's happening in the U.S. I have the same pessimistic view. I think what's happening in the U.S. is really bad for the U.S. I don't think it's necessarily bad for Christians, but it's probably bad for the U.S. And so what he's arguing is this is a good time for us to pull together. It's a good time for us to strengthen the Christian community. We're going to need people who stand with us and who share our values. And then I would just say one last thing. it's a really good time for us to put our hope in Jesus. We've talked about that all the time. It's probably a good time for us actually to do it. Say, you know what? We were always strangers and exiles since the fall of humanity. We were created for this world, but then we broke the world. So now we're misfits. And so what the Bible promises is a resurrection, a resurrected body, resurrected Jerusalem, a resurrected world, resurrected streets, a resurrection of the tree of life. And so we have a new one coming. And what we just need to say is, maybe this world's not so important after all. Maybe I really should put my hope in Jesus. Maybe I really should. I will tell you, those of you who are younger, when you get 60, it becomes a lot easier. We had a fake fire in my house the other day where smoke was billowing out. Turns out probably there was some kind of a little critter on our heater, and the first time it kicked in, it fried him. But smoke was coming out, and I was in a panic, fire extinguishers and everything, and it appears everything's okay. We'll see when I get home today if the house is still there. But it gave me a week to ask myself the question, what could I lose in this house and still be okay? Now, if you've been through a house fire, I hope you're not insulted by my using this illustration, but I felt kind of good about myself when I started thinking, all that stuff I used to care about, I don't know that I care about it much anymore. I could probably lose most of the stuff and it wouldn't bother me. A few pictures and all, but it probably wouldn't bother me that much. At some point, don't you realize, I wasn't supposed to get settled here. Remember how the Hebrew writer puts it? He's talking in Hebrews 11 about, Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and so forth. And he says, these people knew they were strangers and they were looking for another land. If they had been looking for the land from which they came, they could have gone back. But they were looking for a city from God. And therefore, God was not ashamed to be called their God. So this is a really good time for us to allow the Lord to purify us and to help us make the right kinds of positions. I'll put it this way. It's my opinion, but it doesn't have to be yours. It's my opinion that our Joshua 24 moment is arriving like never before in the U.S. Remember Joshua? Choose ye this day whom you shall serve. The gods of the Amorites and whose land you're going, the God of the Egyptians and whose land you've left. But as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. I actually think our Joshua 24 moment's arriving in the U.S. We in the U.S. have been on vacation from Christian harassment. It's been a vacation for us. Most of the world has always been harassed. Most Christians of the world have always been harassed. They're harassed all over the world. 7,000 Christians will be martyred this year on planet Earth because of their faith. 7,000. Somewhere in the vicinity of 500 million Christians are living in a hostile place right now on planet Earth. Probably more than that. We've been on a vacation from it. My opinion is the vacation's over. It's time to get back to work. And so that's what I'll leave you with. Your Joshua 24 moment. Let's get back to work. Thank you for coming.